An elderly millionaire was drinking coffee in a cafe when a street boy brought it to his attention that his son was stealing from him. At that moment, he still couldn't believe it, so he took the boy to his villa and began to investigate. What he discovered brought tears to his eyes. Watch until the end to see how this story turns out. If this story interested you, subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to like this video and tell us from which city you are watching us. Let's continue. The morning sun cast long shadows through the high windows of Café Goldhofen as Heinrich Steinmann took his usual seat in the corner. The 78-year-old entrepreneur had maintained this ritual for years. Every morning, the same table, the same cup of handmade porcelain filled with the aromatic coffee he valued so much. The elegant decor of the cafe reflected his own success, a life full of smart decisions and hard work. With practiced movements, he unfolded the business newspaper, while the waiter discreetly poured a fresh pot of coffee. The other guests, mostly business people in tailored suits, created a muffled backdrop of quiet conversations and the gentle clinking of porcelain. His thoughts drifted to the conversation with his son Thomas the night before. Something about the way Thomas had spoken about the latest company figures wouldn't let him go. An uneasy feeling he couldn't quite place. Perhaps it was the increasingly complex financial reports that had been flooding his desk lately. The focused atmosphere of the cafe was suddenly broken by a commotion at the door. A small boy, at most 12 years old, in worn-out clothes and unkempt hair, had somehow snuck in. The waiters reacted immediately, moving toward him with disapproving looks. "Please, I have to speak with Mr. Steinmann," the boy shouted as he tried to dodge the waiters. The other guests turned around. Some whispered indignantly. Heinrich lowered his newspaper and watched the scene with growing interest. The boy fought his way forward, his eyes fixed firmly on Heinrich. "Mr. Steinmann, it is important. It's about your son." These words made Heinrich sit up and listen. He raised his hand to stop the waiters. "One moment," he said with his deep, authoritative voice that brooked no contradiction. The waiters hesitated but stepped back. The boy seized the opportunity and rushed to Heinrich's table. His eyes were clear and serious, completely different from what his neglected appearance might suggest. "Mr. Steinmann," he said quietly but firmly, "your son. He is cheating you." Heinrich felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. He studied the boy closely, looking for signs of a lie or a trick. But what he saw was pure sincerity. "Sit down," he said finally, pointing to the empty chair opposite him. The boy obeyed immediately, ignoring the disapproving glances of the other guests. "I'm Max," the boy introduced himself, his voice now barely more than a whisper. "And I heard something last night, something you need to know." Heinrich leaned back, folding his hands on the table. The newspaper lay forgotten beside him. "Go on," he said calmly, although his heart was beating faster. Max leaned forward, never taking his eyes off Heinrich. "Your son, he is planning something big. I eavesdropped on him last night when he was on the phone here in the cafe. He spoke of forged documents from doctors who were supposed to help him." Heinrich felt a cold knot form in his stomach. The strange financial reports, Thomas's odd behavior in recent weeks, everything started to make terrible sense. "How do I know you're telling the truth?" Heinrich asked, more to gain time to think than out of genuine doubt. Max pulled a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket. He dropped this when he left. "They are numbers? Account numbers, I think." Heinrich took the paper, studying the hastily scribbled notes. His face turned pale. He recognized his son's handwriting and the number of an offshore account he knew nothing about. Heinrich folded the paper carefully and put it in his jacket pocket. His hands trembled slightly, but his voice remained steady. "Tell me everything you heard. Every detail could be important." Max shifted restlessly in his chair, lowering his voice even further. He spoke of a plan to push you out of the company. He mentioned doctors who are supposed to confirm that you are no longer able to make decisions. The words hit Heinrich like a blow. He thought of his son's increasing concern for his health, the frequent suggestions to slow down, the gentle hints that he might be pushing himself too hard. There was more, Max continued. His eyes darted nervously through the cafe. He was talking to someone about forged signatures and manipulated balance sheets, and about a man named Dr. Weiss. Heinrich froze. Dr. Weiss was his longtime confidant and financial advisor. What did he say about Dr. Weiss? That he had already signed? That he is on board? This? Another betrayal of trust. Heinrich felt decades of certainty dissolve into thin air. He had known Dr. Weiss since the founding of the company and had trusted him blindly. Mr. Steinman? Max's voice pulled him from his thoughts. What will you do now? Heinrich looked at the boy before him. In his worn-out clothes and with his serious face, he suddenly seemed wiser to him than many adults he had trusted. First of all, I want to know why you're helping me, Heinrich said, gently. You could have just stayed silent. Max shrugged, but his gaze remained steady. My mother taught me that you have to do the right thing, even when it's hard. Even when it's hard. Before she broke off, swallowing hard. Heinrich nodded in understanding. He recognized something in the boy that he had missed in his own son. True moral strength. How long have you been living on the streets? He asked cautiously. For 3 months, Max answered quietly, but that's not important. What's important is what you are going to do now. Heinrich leaned back, his business instincts awakening. You're right. We must proceed strategically. Thomas must not suspect that we know. He pulled out his mobile phone and typed a short message. I have an old friend I can still trust. He will help us gather the evidence we need. Max nodded seriously. But what about Dr. Weiss? He could warn Thomas. Dr. Weiss won't do anything, Heinrich said with a grim smile. Not if he knows what's good for him. I still have a few aces up my sleeve. He looked at the boy before him thoughtfully. Max, I want you to keep helping me. You've proven that you're clever and brave, but for that, you have to trust me. Max hesitated briefly, then nodded. I trust you. Good, said Heinrich and stood up. Then let's not waste any time. My driver is waiting outside. We have much to discuss, and I know a safer place for it. As they left the cafe, Heinrich felt the gazes of the other guests bore into their backs. What they saw was a successful businessman with a neglected boy. What they didn't see was the beginning of an unusual alliance that would change the fate of an empire. The black Mercedes glided through the streets of Berlin as Heinrich and Max sat in the spacious back. The boy marveled at the leather interior but barely dared to lean back. Heinrich watched him with a warm-hearted smile. You can relax, he said gently. The leather upholstery has survived worse than a few road stains. Max relaxed a little, his eyes wandering to the tinted windows. Where are we going? To an old friend, replied Heinrich. Victor Lehman. He was my first business partner before he retired. 10 years ago. If there is anyone I can trust in this situation, it is him. The car turned into a quiet suburban street lined with old villas and manicured gardens. The driver stopped in front of a wrought iron gate. A security camera swiveled in their direction. Then the gate opened silently. Victor was already waiting for them on the porch of his house. A tall man in his 70s with an alert gaze and a well-groomed gray beard. He studied Max briefly, but without the usual suspicion the boy was used to. Heinrich, he greeted his old friend with a hug. Your call sounded urgent. Then he turned to Max. And you must be the young man who finally woke up my stubborn friend here. They went into the house to a cozy study with high bookshelves and a wall full of old photographs. Max's gaze lingered on a picture. A younger Heinrich and Victor laughing with a small boy between them, Thomas. Victor followed his gaze. That was 30 years ago at the opening of our first factory. Thomas was 6 back then. He sighed. Time changes people, doesn't it, Heinrich? Heinrich nodded heavily. Sometimes for the worse. He pulled the crumpled note from his pocket and handed it to Victor. What do you see here? Victor studied the notes attentively. His expression darkened. This account number, it leads to a bank in the Cayman Islands, and these numbers here, he pointed to a row of digits. These aren't random amounts. This is a systematic transfer. Can you trace it? Asked Heinrich. Victor smiled grimly. I may be retired, but my contacts are not. Give me an hour. While Victor was making phone calls, a housekeeper brought tea and pastries. Max gratefully took a cookie. His stomach growled audibly. How long has it been since you've had a proper meal? Asked Heinrich gently. Max shrugged his shoulders. Yesterday, a nice lady at the bakery stand gave me an old bread roll. Heinrich felt his heart tighten. Maria, he called out to the housekeeper, would you please prepare a real lunch for us? Half an hour later, Max sat in front of a steaming plate of pasta with meat sauce while Victor returned to the room with a grave expression. It is worse than I thought, he said, spreading several printouts across the desk. Over the last 6 months, funds have been systematically diverted. Small amounts at first, then increasingly larger ones. A total of almost 20 million euros. Heinrich turned pale. How could this happen? Dr. Weiss, Victor said grimly. He authorized the transfers, disguised as investments in new markets. But the money ended up in offshore accounts registered to a shell company. Guess who the beneficiary is? Thomas, Heinrich whispered. Together with Dr. Weiss, Victor confirmed. But that is not all. They've also started spreading rumors among the board of directors about your supposed poor health, about questionable decisions. Max, who had been listening intently, put down his fork. That is true. I heard him say on the phone that the old man has lost his marbles. Heinrich stood up and walked to the window. The manicured gardens outside suddenly seemed unreal to him, like a facade, hiding betrayal and deception. Victor stepped up to the window next to his old friend. What are you going to do, Heinrich? We must proceed carefully, Heinrich replied after a long pause. Thomas must not realize that we are on his trail. Not before we have all the evidence. The board meeting is in 3 days, Victor reminded him. If Thomas presents his plan there, then we must be ready. Heinrich interrupted. He turned to Max, who was still sitting at the table. You said you heard more? Max nodded eagerly. He spoke of a Dr. Mueller. He is supposed to be at the meeting to confirm that you are confused. Victor whistled softly through his teeth. Dr. Mueller, the well-known neurologist, that is a respected name. If he testifies against you, then we need someone even more respected, Heinrich said decisively. He reached for his phone. And I know exactly who. While Heinrich was on the phone, Victor leaned toward Max. You have courage, son. Not many would have dared to get involved. Max blushed slightly. I just couldn't help it. My mother always said that sometimes you have to stand up even when everyone else stays seated. A wise woman, your mother, Victor said gently. Where is she now? Max's eyes filled with tears, but he bravely fought them back. She hasn't been here for 3 months. The landlord kicked us out because I couldn't pay the rent. Victor and Heinrich exchanged a look. That will change, said Heinrich, who had finished his phone call. But for now, we have other concerns. Professor Schaefer is coming in an hour. Gara Schaefer? Victor asked, surprised. The head of the medical association? Heinrich smiled grimly. Thomas may have a respected neurologist, but I have someone who stands above all neurologists. They spent the next hour sifting through further evidence. Victor had reactivated his old contacts and was constantly receiving new information. The picture that was emerging became increasingly bleak. "He has been systematically forging your signature," said Victor, while flipping through the documents. "Here and here, at least a dozen times. The question is," Heinrich pondered aloud, "how many on the board are already on his side?" "I could find that out," Max offered. Everyone looked at him in surprise. "I'm good at staying unnoticed, and people don't pay attention to kids like me, Heinrich shook his head. "Too dangerous if Thomas catches you." "But he's right," Victor interrupted. "Thomas would never suspect a street kid, and we need this information." At that moment, the doorbell rang. Maria led an elegant woman into the room. Professor Clara Schaefer, an imposing figure in her 60s, surveyed the unusual gathering with a sharp gaze. Heinrich greeted his old acquaintance. Victor only hinted at things on the phone. "What is so urgent?" Heinrich explained the situation. Clara listened attentively. Her face became increasingly serious. "Dr. Mueller, then," she finally said. "I know him. A brilliant doctor, but easily influenced. Especially if the fee is right." "Can you help us?" Heinrich asked. Clara gave a thin smile. "Oh, I think so. Dr. Mueller misdiagnosed an interesting case 2 years ago. The medical association covered it up, but," she let the sentence trail off meaningfully. "You would really do that?" Max asked admiringly. Clara looked at him in surprise, then her expression softened. "Sometimes, young man, you have to apply pressure to do the right thing, especially when the wrong thing seems so tempting." Late afternoon cast long shadows through Victor's study as Clara Schaefer explained her strategy. Her voice was calm but determined. "Dr. Mueller will receive an interesting call this evening," she explained. "A friendly reminder of his slip-up. I think that will give him something to think about." Heinrich nodded in appreciation. "And what about Dr. Weiss?" "Dr. Weiss is a different problem," Victor chimed in. "He has too much to lose. If we confront him, he might warn Thomas." Max, who had been listening quietly until now, cleared his throat shyly. Maybe we don't need to confront him at all." All eyes turned toward the boy. He blushed slightly but continued speaking. "I mean, if he thinks everything is going according to plan, he'll stay careless, right?" An approving look went around the room. Out of the mouths of babes, Clara murmured, "The boy is right. Let's let them keep feeling safe." Heinrich stood up and walked to the window. The city lay before them in the golden evening light. "Thomas will be back tomorrow." He was supposedly in Zurich for negotiations. "Actually, he was at the Swiss private bank Goldstein and Partner," Victor added. "My contact saw him there. He has opened new accounts." "He's preparing his exit," Clara observed. "He must suspect that his plan isn't watertight." Max shifted restlessly in his chair. What if he has another plan, something we don't know about?" Heinrich turned around, his eyes thoughtful. "What do you mean?" "When he was on the phone, there was something else. He mentioned a plan B. I couldn't hear everything, but he said something about a complete restart and all or nothing." Victor and Heinrich exchanged concerned glances. "A complete restart? That doesn't sound good." Clara pulled out her tablet. "Let me check something." Her fingers flew across the screen. "Interesting. Steinman AG called an extraordinary board meeting for next week 3 days ago. Agenda item, strategic realignment." "I know nothing about that," Heinrich said sharply. "Of course not," Victor replied grimly, "because the invitations went out from Thomas's office." "With your signature?" Heinrich clenched his fists. "He doesn't just want to take me out, he wants to overhaul the entire company." "The question is, what exactly is he planning?" Clara said thoughtfully. "A complete restart could mean many things. Selling off parts of the company, a merger with another group, or a breakup," Victor added quietly. "That would explain why he is stashing away so much money." He could sell the most valuable parts to himself for a bargain price. Max had been listening attentively. But he would need the board's approval for that, right? Right? Clever, Clara praised. Yes, for that he would need a majority, and that is exactly why we must find out who is on his side. Heinrich finished the sentence. He looked at Max. Are you sure you want to do this? Max nodded decisively. I can start tomorrow morning. Meet the board members. They meet every morning at Café Goldhaven, right? Be careful, Heinrich warned. Just observe, no risky moves. I'll keep an eye on him, Botter. I can stay nearby, keeping a low profile. Clara packed her things together. I will take care of Dr. Mueller. And Heinrich, she looked at her old friend seriously. You have to act like everything is normal tomorrow. Thomas must not become suspicious. Heinrich smiled wearily. I have spent 40 years building an empire. I think I can act for one more day. As the others said their goodbyes, Heinrich held Max back. Where will you sleep tonight? The boy shrugged his shoulders. I know a dry spot under a bridge. Out of the question, Heinrich interrupted him. You will stay here with Victor. He has plenty of guest rooms. Max wanted to protest, but Victor placed a hand gently on his shoulder. No backtalk, young man. Besides, Maria has already prepared your room. The next morning began with a soft knock at Max's door. Maria, Victor's housekeeper, brought fresh clothes and a warm breakfast. Max stared in disbelief at the new jeans and the clean shirt. Mr. Victor thought you needed something appropriate for your surveillance mission, Maria explained with a mischievous smile. An hour later, Max sat in the Café Goldhaven, freshly showered and in his new clothes. He had chosen an inconspicuous spot in the corner from where he could overlook the entire room. Victor sat outside in his car, hunched over the morning newspapers, but always vigilant. The board members arrived one by one. Max had received photos and names from Heinrich, so he could identify everyone. Dr. Weiss arrived among the first, followed by Ms. Bauer, the CFO. Max watched as they gathered in small groups, whispering and exchanging meaningful glances. He made mental notes of who spoke with whom and who stood apart. Then Thomas Steinman entered the cafe. He resembled his father and wore the same expensive suit, but his smile never reached his eyes. He walked straight to Dr. Weiss's table. Max slid deeper into his chair and pricked up his ears. Thomas spoke quietly, but a few words reached him. Everything prepared, majority secured. No surprises. Dr. Weiss seemed nervous. His hands trembled slightly as he raised his coffee cup. But what if your father? Thomas interrupted sharply. My father is a man who doesn't see the signs of the times. In a week it will all be over. Max's heart beat faster. He watched as Thomas went from table to table. Confidential word here. The conspiratorial smile there. Most board members reacted positively to his overtures. Only two held back. Ms. Bauer and an older gentleman whom Max identified as Mr. Schmidt, the head of development. Suddenly, Thomas's phone rang. His face darkened as he read the message. He stepped outside quickly and dialed a number. Max followed him cautiously. He could hear Thomas's agitated voice. What is that supposed to mean? Mueller is pulling out. He had agreed. Excuse me? The medical association? There must be a misunderstanding. At that moment, Thomas turned around. Max ducked behind a pillar just in time. His heart pounded in his chest. Thomas came back in, his face a mask of control. But Max could see his jaw muscles working and his hands clenching into fists. He went straight to Dr. Weiss and leaned in. We'll meet in my office in an hour. Plan B goes into effect. Inform the others. Who? Max waited until Thomas had left the cafe. Then he snuck out to Victor's car. Well? Victor asked, eagerly. It's worse than we thought, Max said breathlessly. Thomas has most of the board members on his side. Only Ms. Bauer and Mr. Schmidt seem to be hesitating. and he told him about the phone call and Plan B. Victor immediately grabbed his phone. Heinrich needs to know this, and he must contact Ms. Bauer and Mr. Schmidt before Thomas does. While Victor was on the phone, Max looked back at the cafe. He felt that they were only just scratching the surface. What was this mysterious Plan B? And why had Thomas still shown that confident smile despite the setback with Dr. Mueller? Heinrich was sitting in his office on the top floor of the Steinman Tower when Victor's call came. He listened attentively while his gaze swept over the city skyline. "I understand," he finally said. "And are you sure that Thomas spoke of a Plan B?" He took notes, his handwriting precise and controlled despite his inner turmoil. At that moment, there was a knock at the door. His secretary, Ms. Weber, poked her head in. "Excuse me, Mr. Steinman, but Ms. Bauer urgently needs to speak with you." Heinrich ended the call with Victor and asked Ms. Bauer to come in. The CFO looked tense, her usually perfect posture slightly slumped. "Mr. Steinman," she began after sitting down, "I need to talk to you about your son." Heinrich leaned back, his face expressionless. "What is it, Ms. Bauer?" She hesitated briefly, then reached into her briefcase. "I have some papers here, documents that worry me." She spread several papers out on his desk. "It's about transactions from the last few months. Unusual movements that I cannot comprehend." Heinrich studied the documents. These were the same transfers Victor had already discovered, but from the different perspective of official accounting. "Have you confronted Thomas about this?" he asked cautiously. Ms. Bauer nodded. He had an explanation for everything: expansion into new markets, restructuring of foreign investments. She paused, but the numbers don't add up. And then there is something else. She pulled out another document. "This is the draft of an agreement with Global Invest Corporation. Thomas prepared it, but hasn't submitted it to the board yet." Heinrich scanned the paper. His eyes widened. "A takeover?" "Not just that," Ms. Bauer said quietly. "Global Invest Corporation is a shell company. I did some digging. It was founded 3 months ago. And guess who is behind it?" "Thomas," Heinrich replied tonelessly, "together with Dr. Weiss and a few other investors." Ms. Bauer leaned forward. "The plan is brilliant in its maliciousness. First you discredit them, then you take control of the board, and finally, you sell the company to your own firm for a fraction of its true value." Heinrich stood up and walked to the window. So the empire he had built, the work of decades, was to end like this. "Why are you telling me this, Ms. Bauer?" She smiled weakly. "I have worked for this company for 20 years. You gave me a chance back then when no one else believed in a woman in this position. I owe you more than just loyalty." At that moment, Heinrich's phone buzzed with a message from Max. "Thomas just entered the building. He looks angry." Heinrich turned to Ms. Bauer. "We don't have much time. What you just told me could change everything, but I need your help." "You have it," Ms. Bauer said without hesitation. "Good." Heinrich sat back down. "Because what I tell you now will show you that we are already one step ahead of Thomas's plans." As he spoke, he noticed movement in the hallway out of the corner of his eye. Max was dressed as a messenger boy, delivering mail while keeping a close watch on everything. The boy had talent, Heinrich had to admit. Ms. Bauer listened intently, her eyes growing wider. So the little boy at the cafe was no coincidence? "Fate," Heinrich said with a smile, "sometimes has an interesting way of opening our eyes." While Heinrich was briefing Ms. Bauer, a tense atmosphere hung in Thomas's office. Dr. Weiss sat nervously on the edge of his chair, while Thomas paced back and forth behind his desk. "Mueller is a coward," Thomas growled. But that won't stop us. Plan B is the better path anyway." But without the medical report, Dr. Weiss began. "We don't need it anymore," Thomas interrupted him. "The Global Invest Corporation is ready. The contracts are prepared. We just have to make it through the board meeting. What about Ms. Bauer? She asked too many questions. Thomas smiled coldly. I will take care of Ms. Bauer personally. She will not cause any problems. At that moment, there was a knock at the door. A young delivery boy, Max in disguise, entered. Mail for you, Mr. Steinman. Thomas waved him off impatiently. Just set it down there. Max did as he was told, but his ears were pricked. He could see Thomas pull a folder out of his desk drawer. Here, Thomas said to Dr. Weiss, are the final figures for the takeover. Once the board approves everything, we'll move very fast. Dr. Weiss scanned the documents, his eyes widening. That is less than half of the actual value. Exactly. Thomas grinned. And guess who gets the other half as a bonus once the deal is done? Max was almost at the door when Thomas called him back. Wait a minute. Haven't we met before? Max's heart skipped a beat, but he turned around calmly. I've only been working here since this week, Mr. Steinman. Thomas eyed him suspiciously, then waved him off. Fine, you can go. Max hurried to leave the office. His heart was hammering. He had to warn Heinrich. Thomas's plan was even more perfidious than they had thought. Meanwhile, Heinrich had finished his conversation with Ms. Bauer. She was now fully informed and ready to help. What you're telling me, she said, shaking her head, sounds like a bad movie, but the evidence is clear. And now, you understand why we have to proceed so carefully, Heinrich replied. Thomas must not suspect that we know. Not before. He was interrupted by a message on his phone. Max had written, urgent. New information about Plan B meeting at Victor's house. Heinrich looked at Ms. Bauer. Would you support us at an important meeting tonight? Hadi? She nodded decisively. Of course. At what time? 8 o'clock at Victor Lehman's. He wrote down an address. And Ms. Bauer? Be careful, Thomas has already set his sights on you. After she left, Heinrich leaned back in his chair. Events were spiraling out of control. Thomas's plan was almost perfect. If only there hadn't been a little boy who happened to hear the right thing. He grabbed his phone and dialed Clara's number. We have to change the schedule, he said without preamble. Thomas isn't going to wait for the official board meeting. He is planning something for the next few days. Understood? Understood, replied Clara. I have interesting news about Global Invest Corporation anyway. You should hear this. Heinrich looked at his watch. 4 more hours until the meeting, 4 hours in which anything could happen. He just hoped they had enough time to thwart Thomas's Plan B evening. Fell over the city as the small group gathered in Victor's study. Heinrich, Victor, and Max were already there when Clara Schaefer and Ms. Bauer arrived almost at the same time. Before we begin, Clara said, opening her briefcase, you should take a look at this. She spread several documents out on the large desk. Global Invest Corporation is more than just a shell company. It is part of a complex network of businesses. Ms. Bauer leaned over the papers, her eyes widening. These are the biggest competitors of Steinman AG. Exactly. Clara nodded. Thomas hasn't just set up a takeover firm. He's built connections to our main competitors. The plan is to weaken Steinman AG and then sell it off in parts to various competitors. Heinrich sank into his armchair. He doesn't just want to take over the company, he wants to tear it apart. Max, who had been listening silently until now, spoke up. That explains what I heard in his office today. He recounted the conversation between Thomas and Dr. Weiss about the documents and the true values. But why? Asked Victor. Why does he want to destroy his father's life's work? Revenge, Heinrich said quietly. It's not just about money, it's about revenge. Everyone looked at him questioningly. Heinrich stood up and walked to the window. 15 years ago, I made a difficult decision. Thomas had presented a risky expansion plan, wanting to lead the company into new, dangerous markets. I refused. He was furious, threatened to resign. I let him leave, but he came back. added Victor. Yes, 2 years later, remorseful as it seemed, I gave him a second chance. Heinrich turned to the others. A mistake, as it now turns out. He has been waiting for this moment the whole time, Mrs. Bauer said thoughtfully, carefully planning every step. Clara nodded. The question is, what do we do now? The official board meeting is in 3 days, but after what Max heard, he won't wait that long. Heinrich finished the sentence. He will strike before then. Mrs. Bauer, how many board members does he have on his side? At least 6 out of 10, she answered. With Dr. Weiss, it's 7. A comfortable majority. Not anymore, Clara said with a smile. Dr. Weiss received an interesting call from the banking regulator this afternoon. Something about irregular transactions on his private accounts. He has become nervous. Victor whistled appreciatively. You are dangerous, Clara. I prefer the term thorough, she replied dryly. Max, who had been studying the documents the whole time, suddenly looked up. Here, take a look. He pointed to a spot in the papers. Thomas has scheduled an extraordinary meeting for tomorrow morning with 3 board members at the lobby firm, Berliner Consulting. Heinrich leaned forward. That's no normal meeting, that is a secret board meeting, Mrs. Bauer finished. He wants to push the takeover through before the official meeting with a smaller, controllable circle. Can we prevent that? Asked Victor. Heinrich smiled grimly. Oh, yes, but for that we need all the evidence, and we have to present it to the right people at the right time. I could, Max began hesitatingly. No, Heinrich interrupted him gently. You have already risked more than enough. This is our task now. But Max shook his head. I have an idea, one that could work without anyone putting themselves in danger. The adults looked at each other. Finally, Heinrich nodded. Let's hear it. Max took a deep breath and began to explain. His voice became increasingly confident. Berliner Consulting has its offices in the business district, right next to the big shopping center. I know the building. I've often been there. He paused briefly. Yes, I sometimes slept there in the maintenance area of the parking garage. Clara wanted to say something, but Victor gently placed a hand on her arm. Max continued. There is an old service elevator that only the cleaning staff uses. It leads directly to the conference area. And the best part is, the walls of the conference rooms are thin. You can hear everything that is being said inside if you are in the maintenance room next door. Heinrich frowned. That sounds risky regardless. Not if we go about it right, Max said eagerly. See, Thomas doesn't know me. He only saw me briefly as a delivery boy today. What if I pose as an intern for the cleaning company? Absolutely not, Heinrich interrupted. That is too dangerous. But Mrs. Bauer had been listening thoughtfully. Wait, she said. The boy might be right. Not about the eavesdropping, but about the cleaning service. She pulled out her tablet and typed quickly. Berliner Consulting uses the cleaning service Clanch. And guess who sits on the supervisory board of Clanch? Victor asked, surprised. Mrs. Bauer smiled. One of my many side jobs. I could arrange for a deep cleaning of the conference rooms early tomorrow morning. With special equipment, he whistled softly through his teeth, recording device. State-of-the-art technology, Mrs. Bauer nodded. Installed completely legally as part of routine maintenance. Heinrich leaned back. A slow smile spread across his face. That could work. But we need more than just recordings. We need witnesses. Victor finished. Trustworthy witnesses who happen to be at the right place at the right time. I could schedule an urgent consultation with the management of Berliner Consulting, Clara offered. As head of the medical association, I carry quite some weight. And, I said, Mrs. Bauer could schedule a routine audit of the business relationship between Clench and Berliner Consulting. With a small team, of course. Max watched as the plan took shape. The adults complemented each other perfectly. Everyone brought their strengths to the table. But something was still missing. What about Dr. Weiss? He asked suddenly. He is Thomas. most important ally. If he gets cold feet and doesn't show up, I've already taken care of that, Clara said, with a subtle smile. He will be there, and he will be very, very nervous. Heinrich stood up and walked to the window. The city lights were reflected in his eyes. Tomorrow morning, then, he said quietly, the moment of truth. Victor stepped up beside him. We will save your life's work, old friend. No, Heinrich said, and turned around. His gaze rested on Max. We will do more than that. We will prove that character is stronger than greed. Max blushed under Heinrich's gaze, but he held his ground. In that moment, he no longer felt like a street kid. He had become part of something bigger. The early morning began with a precise choreography. Even before the first rays of sunlight reached the high-rises of the business district, the Clinch team was already at work in the conference rooms of Berliner Consulting. Under Mrs. Bauer's discreet guidance, the most modern cleaning equipment was installed. Heinrich sat in his office and went through all the details once more. His phone buzzed. A message from Clara. Dr. Weiss has been awake for an hour. My contacts at the banking regulator have done a great job. Another buzz? Victor. I'm in position. The security staff at Berliner Consulting has been informed that high-ranking visitors are expected today. Heinrich allowed himself a small smile. The plan was well thought out, every detail considered, yet worry gnawed at him. Thomas was clever. He had worked toward this moment for years. Would he smell a trap? A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Max slipped in, wearing an impeccable suit that Victor had gotten for him. Is everything ready? Asked Heinrich. Max nodded. Miss Bauer checked the equipment personally. The acoustics are perfect. He hesitated briefly. But Thomas, he seemed so confident this morning when I saw him at the filler. Heinrich leaned back in his chair. That is his greatest weakness. He was always too confident, too convinced of his own plans. Like you two back during the expansion? Asked Max cautiously. Heinrich looked at the boy in surprise and laughed softly. You are too smart for your age. Did you know that? Yes, just like I was back then. The difference is, I learned from my mistakes. He stood up and walked to the window. In the distance, he could see the Berliner Consulting building. Thomas thinks he's playing chess, seeing 3 or 4 moves ahead. But sometimes you don't win with complicated strategies, but with simple truth. Max stepped beside him. What time is the meeting scheduled? 10 o'clock, answered Heinrich. In 1 hour it all begins. He turned to Max. You stay here, understood? Victor will stay with you. Max wanted to protest, but Heinrich raised his hand. That is not a request. You have done more than enough. We will handle the rest. At that moment, Heinrich's phone buzzed again. A message from Kara. Dr. Weiss wants to talk right now. Heinrich read the message twice. That was not part of the plan. But perhaps, tell Victor to bring Dr. Weiss to my office through the back entrance. Max hurried off while Heinrich steeled himself. His gaze fell on an old photo on his desk. He and Thomas, 20 years ago, at the opening of a new factory. Both smiling, proud, arm in arm. 10 minutes later, Victor led a visibly nervous Dr. Weiss inside. The man Heinrich had known for 30 years looked like he had aged years. Heinrich, he began, his voice trembling. I have to confess something to you. Heinrich pointed to the chair in front of his desk. I'm listening. Dr. Weiss slumped into the chair. His face was ashen. I am sorry. All these years, I thought it was just business. But what Thomas is planning, he took a deep breath. He doesn't just want the company. He wants to destroy everything you've built. And I helped him do it. Heinrich looked at his old friend for a long time. Why are you telling me this now? Because Dr. Weiss swallowed hard. Because Thomas has gone one step too far. He didn't just forge documents and move accounts, he stopped. His hands were trembling. Heinrich waited patiently while Dr. Weiss wrestled with himself. Victor stood still in the corner, ready to intervene if necessary. Outside the door, Max kept watch, his ear pressed against the heavy wood. "He faked evidence," Dr. Weiss finally said. "Not just financial documents. He has systematically spread false information about you, about the company, about everyone who stood in his way, Musrok." "We already know that," Heinrich said calmly. Dr. Weiss shook his head. "No, you don't understand. It goes deeper. Global Invest Corporation, it's just the tip of the iceberg. Thomas has built an entire network. He collected information, exploited weaknesses, manipulated people. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a USB stick. Here is everything. Every transaction, every connection, every plan. I copied it last night after I received the call from the banking regulators." Heinrich took the stick, looking at it thoughtfully. "Why should I trust you?" "Because I am old and tired," Dr. Weiss replied bitterly. "And because I've seen what Thomas is capable of. What he did to Schmidt." "Schmidt?" Heinrich sat up straighter. "What about him?" "He blackmailed him with forged evidence of alleged industrial espionage. Schmidt wanted to fight back, but then Thomas threatened to leak the evidence to the press. That wouldn't just have ruined Schmidt's career, but also destroyed his family." Victor stepped forward. "That's why Schmidt has been acting so strangely lately." "Lately?" "Yes." Dr. Weiss nodded, "and he isn't the only one. Thomas has something on everyone except," he looked at Heinrich, "except for you. That's the reason for this complex plan, for Global Invest Corporation." Heinrich stood up and walked to the window. The sun was higher now, casting long shadows between the skyscrapers. In half an hour, the meeting at Berliner Consulting would begin. "Victor," he said without turning around, "take Dr. Weiss to Clara. She needs to document everything, every detail." He turned to face Dr. Weiss. "You will testify in front of the entire board?" Dr. Weiss nodded wearily. "Yes, it is time someone stopped Thomas." After Victor and Dr. Weiss had left, Heinrich let Max in. The boy had, of course, overheard everything. "That changes everything, doesn't it?" Max asked. Heinrich shook his head. "No, it only confirms what we already suspected. Thomas isn't just playing for power or money. He's playing for total control." He looked at his watch. 20 minutes left, until the meeting at Berliner Consulting begins. A grim smile appeared on his face. "Thomas thinks he holds all the strings, but he has made one crucial mistake." "Which one?" Max asked curiously. "He has forgotten that true strength does not lie in controlling others." Heinrich placed a hand on Max's shoulder. "But in standing up for what is right, even if you risk everything." His phone buzzed. A message from Ms. Bauer. "All systems ready. Thomas is on his way to the conference room." Heinrich grabbed his coat. "It is time. The moment of truth is drawing near." The Berliner Consulting conference room was slowly filling up. Thomas stood at the head of the long table, impeccably dressed, smiling confidently. He checked the documents in front of him one last time. Forged balance sheets, manipulated reports, everything carefully prepared. 3 board members had already arrived, sitting nervously in their seats. Schmidt was the last to enter the room, his face a mask of resignation. "Ah, good," said Thomas with a fake smile. "Then we're all here. Where is Dr. Weiss?" "He's running a bit late," one of the board members replied. "He called to say he would be here in 10 minutes. Thomas frowned briefly, but quickly composed himself. "Very well, then we shall start without him. Time is of the essence." He was just opening his folder when the door opened again. A cleaning person stepped in, pushing a maintenance cart in front of her. "Please excuse me," the woman said politely. "Routine air conditioning maintenance will only take a moment." Thomas waved her off impatiently. "Make it quick. We have an important meeting." The cleaner nodded and began working on the air vents. No one noticed how she adjusted tiny microphones while doing so. Out in the hallway, Kara Schaefer happened to position herself near the conference room, absorbed in a seemingly important conversation with the Berliner consulting management. In a van parked in front of the building sat Ms. Bauer with a technician monitoring the audio transmission. "All clear," she whispered into her headset. "We can hear every word." Thomas cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen, I have called you here today because we must make an important decision. A decision that brooks no delay." He handed out documents. "As you can see, things are not looking good for Steinman AG. The numbers speak for themselves." Schmidt flipped through the documents. His face grew even paler. The forged figures were convincing, showing a company on the brink of ruin. "But there is a solution," Thomas continued. "Global Invest Corporation has submitted a takeover bid, a very generous offer, considering the current situation." At that moment, there was a knock at the door. Dr. Weiss entered, but not alone. Behind him stood Heinrich Steinman. Thomas froze for a moment, but quickly regained his composure. "Father, what a surprise." "Is it?" Heinrich asked calmly. He stepped into the room, followed by Victor and, to Thomas's visible horror, a team of auditors. "What is the meaning of this?" asked Thomas sharply. "This is a private meeting." "Oh, I don't think so," said Heinrich, sitting down at the table. "This is an unauthorized board meeting where the future of my company is to be decided. The owner should certainly be present, shouldn't he?" What? A tense silence descended over the room. Thomas was still standing at the head of the table, his knuckles white from his tight grip on the back of his chair. "This is ridiculous," he said finally. "We are discussing the rescue of the company here. A company that, under your leadership, under my leadership," Heinrich interrupted gently. He pulled out a USB drive, the same one Dr. Weiss had given him. "Let's take a look at how the company is really doing." He nodded to Victor, who opened a laptop and connected it to the conference room projector. The true business figures of Steinman AG appeared on the screen. "As you can see," Heinrich said to the board members present, "our company is doing excellently. Profits are rising, markets are expanding, the innovation rate is higher than ever." Thomas gave a forced laugh. "Those are manipulated figures. I have the real balance sheets right here." "The real balance sheets?" Dr. Weiss asked suddenly. His voice trembled, but he continued. "Like the ones you forced me to forge." All eyes turned to Dr. Weiss. Thomas's face darkened. "What are you talking about?" "The truth, Thomas," said Dr. Weiss. "For the first time in years, the truth." He turned to the other board members. Everything was forged. The losses, the risk assessments, the alleged management errors. Thomas spun a web of lies to take control. Schmidt rose slowly. "Is that true? The evidence against me? The alleged industrial espionage?" "All faked," confirmed Dr. Weiss. "Thomas manipulated every one of us, pressured us first." Thomas slammed his fist on the table. "That is slander. I have proof." "Global Invest Corporation," Heinrich asked calmly. "Your secret takeover firm? Or should we talk about the offshore accounts where you hid company funds?" The door opened again. Clara Schaefer entered, accompanied by two representatives from the Banking Regulatory Authority. "The accounts are frozen, by the way," she said. "All 23. Thomas's face turned ashen. His gaze darted to the door, as if searching for an escape route. But Victor was already standing there, calm and unshakable. "It's over, Thomas," Heinrich said gently. "The board has all the evidence. The authorities have been informed. Your network of lies is collapsing." "You don't understand," Thomas hissed. "I would have led the company into the future, away from your old-fashioned notions of ethics and morality. Business is war, Father. And in war, there are no rules." Heinrich stood up, walking slowly around the table to his son. "You're wrong there, Thomas. There are always rules. And the most important one is, you don't betray your family, your friends, or your principles just to win." He turned to the board. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we have a decision to make. The vote was unanimous. Thomas was removed from all offices with immediate effect. As the security guards arrived to escort him out, he looked at his father one last time. "You should have trusted me," he said bitterly. "No, Thomas," Heinrich replied. "You should have trusted yourself, your better self." The news spread like wildfire through the company. Employees stood in small groups whispering about the dramatic events at Berlin Consulting. Thomas's office was sealed, computers and documents confiscated. Heinrich sat in his office, exhausted but relieved. Victor and Clara were with him, as well as Max, who sat silently in a corner watching everything. "The press release is out," Clara said, closing her tablet. "We framed the story as discussed. An internal audit uncovered irregularities. The board acted decisively." "What about the others involved?" Victor asked. "Dr. Weiss is cooperating fully with the authorities," answered Clara. "His testimony will be crucial." The other board members are shaken but relieved that it all came to light. Heinrich nodded slowly. "And Schmidt?" "He has already offered his resignation," Victor said. "But I think we should keep him. He was also a victim in this story." "Yes," Heinrich agreed. "He deserves a second chance, like all of us." Max shifted restlessly in his chair. "What happens to the company now?" Heinrich smiled at the boy. "We are rebuilding, more transparent, stronger, with better controls. And above all," he paused, "with people we can trust." At that moment, there was a knock at the door. Ms. Bauer stepped in, a thick folder under her arm. "The first evaluations are in," she said. "Thomas's network was larger than we thought. He had established connections to at least 3 other large corporations, all with the goal of taking over Steinman AG and breaking it up." "But why?" Max asked. "I still don't understand why he did all this." Heinrich sighed deeply. Power, money, revenge, maybe a bit of everything. But in the end, it was probably mostly his wounded pride. He could never accept that one can have success without destroying others. "The question is," Victor chimed in, "how we prevent such situations in the future." "I already have some ideas," Ms. Bauer said. She opened her folder and spread out several documents. "A new compliance system, stricter internal controls, more transparency in all areas." "And what about me?" Max asked quietly. Everyone looked at him. The boy who had started everything was suddenly sitting there again, unsure of his role in this world of adults and their business. Heinrich stood up and walked over to him. "You, my young friend, have taught us all an important lesson. Sometimes it takes the unbiased eyes of a child to see the truth." He placed a hand on Max's shoulder. "And that is why I have a proposal for you. If you would like, I could become your guardian. You would go to school, get an education." Max's eyes widened. "Really? But I'm just a street kid." "Now," Heinrich said firmly, "you are a young man with character and courage. Exactly the kind of person this world needs." A week later, the storm had settled. Steinman AG had called an extraordinary press conference where Heinrich presented the new company structure. The media was full of praise for the transparent handling of the events. In Victor's house, they were all sitting together. Heinrich, Victor, Kara, Ms. Bauer, and Max. Maria had prepared a festive dinner to celebrate the successful end of the crisis. "The papers are through," said Kara, laying an official-looking document on the table. "Max is officially under your guardianship now, Heinrich." Max, in a new sweater and with freshly cut hair, was beaming from ear to ear. "I still can't believe it." "Believe it?" Victor smiled. "You've earned it. Besides," he winked at Heinrich, "you need a clear head for tomorrow. The first day of school is always exciting." "Speaking of school," said Ms. Bauer, St. Michael's private school accepted him immediately when they heard about his mathematical skills. Apparently, someone mentioned how quickly he saw through complicated financial transactions. Everyone laughed while Max blushed. Heinrich raised his glass. To new beginnings. "And what about Thomas?" asked Max after a while. The question had been hanging in the air all evening. Heinrich set his glass down. "You will have to answer for his actions," but he looked around the room. "Perhaps you will learn something from it too. Sometimes it takes a hard fall to get back up again." "The company is stronger than before in any case," said Miss Bauer. "The new compliance rules are in effect. The board is more united than ever, and the employees fully support the changes because they see that things can be done differently." Clara nodded. "That you can be successful without selling your soul?" Victor stood up. "I would like to propose a toast. To Heinrich, who showed us all what true leadership means. To Max, who reminded us that character is more important than status. And to the future of Steinman AG, may it be bright and honorable." Everyone raised their glasses. Max, drinking his lemonade, felt like he truly belonged for the first time in his life. He had not only found a new home, but also a family, one built on trust and mutual respect. Heinrich watched the boy and smiled. In his darkest hours, fate had sent him an unexpected ally. One who reminded him that the most important things in life were not to be found in balance sheets and business figures. He said softly to Max, "Sometimes I wonder who saved whom here." Max looked at him inquisitively. "You didn't just save the company," Heinrich explained. "You have shown us all that it is worth standing up for what is right, that you are never too young to make a difference and never too old to learn something." 3 months later, Max was sitting at his new desk in his room at Heinrich's villa. His math homework lay in front of him, but his thoughts drifted to the events of the last few weeks. Steinman had recovered surprisingly quickly from the crisis. Heinrich's open handling of the occurrences had strengthened the trust of employees and business partners. The new corporate structure that Ms. Bauer had developed was praised in the business press as exemplary. A knock at the door pulled Max from his thoughts. Heinrich entered, a newspaper in his hand. "How is the homework coming along?" he asked with a smile. "Good," Max replied. "Ms. Schmidt says I could skip a grade if I keep this up." Heinrich sat on the edge of the desk. "That does not surprise me. You have a sharp mind." He set the newspaper down. "Have you read the news?" Max took the newspaper. The headline announced, quote, "Steinman AG introduces revolutionary social program." The article reported on a new initiative by the company. A program to support disadvantaged youth with apprenticeships, scholarships, and mentoring. "That was your idea, wasn't it?" Max asked. Heinrich shook his head. "No, it was Victor's. He said your story had inspired him. Sometimes it only takes one person to open others' eyes." Max turned red. He was still not used to such praise. "There is something else," Heinrich continued. "The board has decided to establish a foundation, the Future Plus Foundation. It is intended to look after children and youth who need help." And he made a meaningful pause. "We would like you to sit on the foundation's youth council." Max stared at him in disbelief. But I am only 13. "Exactly for that reason," Heinrich smiled. "Who could better understand what these children need than someone who has been there themselves?" At that moment, the telephone rang. It was Clara who had good news. The final legal hurdles for Max's permanent adoption had been cleared. "It is official now," said Heinrich after he had hung up. If you are ready, I could not just be your guardian, but your father." Max felt tears well up in his eyes. Since the loss of his mother, he had not dared to hope to have a real family again. He swallowed hard. "I would love that very much." Heinrich hugged him tightly. For a moment they simply stood there, father and son, united by an unexpected twist of fate. "Oh," said Heinrich, remembering. "Victor and Maria are inviting us to dinner. They want to celebrate something special." "What is it?" Max asked curiously. Heinrich winked. "You'll see soon enough, but I can tell you it has to do with the Future Plus Foundation and a certain housekeeper who has a special talent for working with children." The evening at Victor's was, as always, perfectly organized. Maria had outdone herself. The scent of her famous pot roast drifted through the whole house. But something was different. The large dining table was festively set, and alongside the usual guests there were some new faces to be seen. Clara was there, elegant as always, and Mrs. Bauer. But Dr. Schmidt and his wife had also come, and to Max's surprise, there were even 3 children about his age whom he had never seen before. Victor stood up to reveal the secret. "Dear friends," he began, "today we are not only celebrating Max's official adoption, we are also celebrating the start of a new chapter." He took Maria's hand. The usually reserved housekeeper was beaming. "Maria has agreed to take over the management of our first Future Plus residential project. A home for children who need a second chance, just like Max received." The 3 strangers, 2 boys and a girl, would be the first residents. Max watched as they looked on shyly, yet full of hope, yet full. He recognized that look. It was the same one he had had when Heinrich offered him a new future. "And that's not all," added Victor. "Dr. Schmidt will lead the mentoring program. Who could better understand how important second chances are?" Schmidt nodded solemnly. His experiences with Thomas's blackmail had changed him, but for the better. He had learned his lesson and now wanted to help others. During dinner, Max watched as the children slowly opened up. They told their stories of loss, loneliness, and hope. Stories that were so similar to his own. Heinrich leaned toward his new son. "Do you remember what you said back then at the café, that sometimes you have to do the right thing, even if it's hard?" Max nodded. "You have achieved more than just saving a company," Heinrich continued. "You have started a movement for change." After dinner, Maria led the children through their future home, the renovated east wing of Victor's villa. Max went along, answering their questions and sharing his own experiences. Later that evening, as they drove home, Max was unusually quiet. "What are you thinking about?" "Sir," asked Heinrich. "I'm wondering what has become of Thomas," Max answered honestly, massly. Heinrich sighed slightly. "He chose a fresh start in America, far away from here, but perhaps that was for the best for everyone." "Do you think he will change?" "I don't know," said Heinrich thoughtfully. "But I know that every person has the capacity for change. Sometimes it just takes someone who believes in that possibility." They turned into the driveway of their villa. The house, which had once belonged only to Heinrich, was now their shared home, a symbol of the changes that a little boy with great courage had brought about. The autumn sun shone through the large windows of the Steinmann conference room. A year had passed since the dramatic events that had changed the company and so many lives. Max stood at the lectern, his school uniform immaculate, his self-confidence appearing to have grown. In front of him sat the board members, journalists, and representatives of various social organizations. This was the first public annual report of the Future Plus Foundation. "In the past year," he began with a firm voice, "our foundation has given 50 children and teenagers a new chance. 20 of them live in our residential projects. The other 30 are supported through mentoring and educational programs." He flipped through his documents, which he had compiled himself. Heinrich sat in the front row, visibly proud of his adopted son. "But numbers only tell part of the story," Max continued. "We see the true successes in individual fates. Lisa, who is now training to be a mechatronics engineer. Kevin, who passed his high school graduation exams with top marks. Sarah, who received a scholarship for music studies. Maria, who is now managing the residential projects, smiled from her seat. Under her leadership, the houses had become true homes where children found not only shelter, but also love and guidance. "We have learned," said Max, "that it often only takes one person who believes in you. A moment when someone listens to you. A chance that you can seize." Victor, who was sitting next to Heinrich, nodded in agreement. The foundation had become his passion project. He had found further supporters and convinced other companies to join in. For the coming year, Max announced, "We are planning the opening of 3 more residential projects. The mentoring program will be expanded to 100 places." And he took a meaningful pause. "We are launching a new project, Youth Leads Youth, a program in which successful participants become mentors for new candidates." The applause was warm and sincere. Ms. Bauer, who oversaw the foundation's finances, gave an appreciative thumbs up. The numbers were impressive, but even more impressive was the transformation they saw in the children. After the presentation, there was a small reception. Journalists crowded around Max, asking questions about his own story. He answered calmly and thoughtfully, without giving too much away. The past was important, but it was the future that counted. Heinrich joined him as the reporters moved on. "You did a great job," he said proudly. Max smiled. "I had a good teacher." "Several," Heinrich corrected. "Victor, Clara, Maria, we all learned from each other." They stepped to the window. From up here, you could see the whole city. Somewhere out there were children who needed help. Children like Max back then. "You know," Heinrich said thoughtfully, "sometimes I wonder what Thomas would say about this." Max was silent for a moment. "Have you ever heard from him again?" "He sends emails occasionally," Heinrich replied. "Short messages from America. He has started a small consulting firm there. Nothing big, but," he smiled slightly, "he seems to be finding his way." In the late afternoon, everyone gathered at Café Goldhofen, the place where it all began. Heinrich had reserved the entire area, and the familiar surroundings were filled with warm laughter and lively conversation. Clara and Ms. Bauer discussed the next steps for the foundation. Victor and Maria reported on the progress of their protégés. Dr. Schmidt, who had made the mentoring program a great success, shared his latest ideas. Max sat among them, no longer the shy street boy from back then, but a self-confident young person with clear goals. He had not only achieved top marks in class, but also started tutoring other children in mathematics. "Sometimes," Clara said, raising her wine glass, "it takes a crisis to bring out the best in people or a brave boy." Victor added, "Who shows us what is truly important." Max blushed slightly. "I only did what was right." "Exactly that," Heinrich said, "is the point. You have shown us all that it is never too late to do the right thing, that one is never too young or too old to make a difference." At that moment, a young girl entered the café. She looked confused and frightened. Her clothes were worn out. Max immediately recognized the look in her eyes. It was the same one he had had a year ago. Without hesitation, he stood up and walked over to her. "Can I help you?" he asked gently. The girl flinched but relaxed when she saw his kind eyes. I don't know." "Come," said Max, pointing to their table. "Sit with us. Tell us your story." Heinrich watched the scene with a warm smile. The circle had come full circle. The boy who had sought help had become someone who helped others. The girl, whose name was Anna, as it turned out, told her story. A story of loss and hope, not unlike Max's own. And as she spoke, Max saw in the faces around him the same understanding, the same determination to help that had been shown to him back then. "You know," he said later to Heinrich as they drove home, "I understand now what you meant back then about change and second chances." Heinrich nodded. "And what did you understand?" "That it's not enough to be given a second chance yourself," Max replied. "You have to give them to others too. That is what truly changes us." They turned into the driveway of their villa. The light of the setting sun bathed everything in warm gold. A new day would come, with new challenges and new opportunities to do good. "Dad," Max said suddenly. The word came naturally to his lips by now. "Yeah, thank you for everything." Heinrich smiled. "No, my son, I thank you. You have given me more than you will ever know." 2 years had passed since that fateful day at the Café Goldhofen. Steinman AG had not only recovered but was stronger and more successful than ever. But the greatest success was not shown in the business figures, but in the lives that had been changed. On this special morning, there was a festive atmosphere in the large conference room of the corporate headquarters. The Zukunft Plus Foundation was celebrating its 2-year anniversary, and the achievements were impressive. Max, now 15 and one of the youngest speakers at business conferences, stood at the podium again. This time the hall was even fuller than at the last annual report. Representatives from all over Europe had come to learn about the Steinman model. 2 years ago, our journey began with a simple idea. Every person deserves a second chance. Today we stand here with over 200 success stories, 200 lives that have found a new direction. In the front row sat Heinrich, flanked by Victor and Kara. Ms. Bauer, who had since risen to CEO, nodded approvingly at every statistic Max presented. "But true success," Max continued, "is not just shown in numbers. It is shown in Anna, who today leads our first youth mentoring team, in Michael, who started his own small business after his training, in Sarah, who just gave her first piano concert at the Philharmonic." The presentation continued, but it wasn't just successes that Max presented. He also spoke openly about challenges, about setbacks, and about what they had learned from them. "We understood," he said, "that change takes time, that not everyone is immediately ready to accept help. But we also learned to be patient, to listen, and to never give up hope." After the presentation, there was a special moment. Heinrich stepped onto the podium for the first time in a long while, visibly moved. "2 years ago," he said, "a young man came into my life and taught me that true strength lies not in the power one has, but in the way one uses it. Today I stand here not just as an entrepreneur, but as a proud father." He turned directly to Max. "You didn't just save a company, my son. You showed us all a new path. A path that connects success with humanity." The foundation now had branches in 3 European countries. The model was studied and copied, but the core remained the same. The personal connection, the understanding that every person is unique and has their own story. At the end of his speech, Heinrich announced a surprise. Steinman AG would henceforth invest 10% of its annual profit into the foundation, because success is only truly meaningful when it opens the way up for others. The applause was overwhelming. Journalists pushed forward, cameras flashed, but Max's attention was on a single face in the crowd, a new boy who had just been admitted to the program and was watching everything with wide eyes. The last ray of sun of the day fell through the windows of Café Goldhofen as the small group met for their traditional gathering. It was the anniversary of that momentous day when everything began. Heinrich, now 80 but still vital, sat at the same table as back then. Max next to him, Victor and Kara, Ms. Bauer and Maria. They had all come. But this time they were not alone. Sitting around them were the young people from the program. Old and new faces, each with their own story of change and hope. "You know," said Heinrich, his coffee steaming in front of him, "sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Max hadn't had the courage to come to me that day." "Then fate would have found another way," said Kara with a smile. "Good people always find each other." Max looked at the young people around them. There was Anna, who had since taken 5 more children under her wing. Michael, who was building his startup with other program participants, and Sarah, who gave music lessons to the younger ones. "The most important thing," said Max, "is not what we have achieved, but what we pass on. At that moment, the cafe door opened and a surprising guest stepped inside. Thomas, aged but upright, stood in the doorway. He had come from America for the first time in 2 years. The tension in the room was palpable, but Heinrich stood up and walked over to his son. They looked at each other for a moment, then they embraced briefly. "I heard about the foundation," Thomas said quietly. "About everything you have achieved." He looked over at Max. "You were right, Father. There are more important things than power and control." The reconciliation was quiet, without any big words. Thomas sat down with them and listened as the young people told their stories. In his eyes there was something new, understanding, perhaps even regret. "You know," he said later to Max, "back then you didn't just save the company, you also saved me, even if it took a long time for me to realize that." The evening came to an end, but it did not feel like an ending. It was a new beginning, another page in a story that went on. Heinrich rose for a final toast. "To the future," he said, "to the power of change and to the wisdom that sometimes comes from the mouths of the youngest." As they left the cafe later, Max paused briefly and looked back at the place where it all had begun. A little boy had once dared to take a courageous step here. That step had made waves that rippled out further and further. "Are you coming?" called Heinrich from the door. Max smiled and nodded. Yes, he was coming. The story continued, and he was excited to see what new chapters would still be written. Dear listeners, the story of Max and Heinrich shows us that change is possible if we have the courage to stand up for what is right. Their story not only changed Steinman AG, but also touched countless lives and gave them new hope. If you would like to hear more moving stories like this, telling of courage, change, and the power of humanity, then subscribe to our channel. Every day we bring you new inspiring stories that touch the heart and give you food for thought. Feel free to leave us a comment and share your thoughts on this story with us. What touched you the most? What experiences have you had with change and second chances? Hit the like button and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our stories. Together we can make the world a little bit better, one story at a time.